Okay. Do you have any questions getting started?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if I think I completely changed like the focus of
Okay.
because it was lesson planning, but I didn't find any primary research on lesson planning.
Okay.
I only
So.
found a lot of theory, and the one I found, remember I kind of showed it to you.
Uh-huh.
It talks about like evaluating the class, which is kind of like, well, they have the lesson and they reflect about it. So I think now it's like the topic would be like reflecting or evaluation.
Okay.
And the
Because it's really going to be about the same as what you have here, no? You're finding out how they adhere or don't adhere to their lesson plan, right?
well, I was
Or not?
thinking if I can do like more of a um like a quantitative study, like to see when teachers um, when do they reflect and like why do they reflect or
Quantitative or
yeah,
qualitative?
no, quantitative.
Quantitative?
Like to see like their
Just
opinion.
well, their opinions would be more qualitative, no? If you're asking for their opinions, if you're getting like their attitudes or opinions or their reflection on their own lesson, and they're talking to you through an interview,
Oh, okay.
that would be more of a qualitative
Oh,
research where it's more based on text and interpretation,
oh,
not so much on numbers and statistics or inferential state. It would be more descriptive.
oh, okay. But I still have to go and observe classes or like
Well,
if I
I
want
mean,
to know like
or you want to do like a survey.
yeah, like
Okay.
why they reflect or when they reflect, like what
Okay.
do they think helps
Okay.
them.
And are you basing this on another research?
Yeah,
That
it's
one that you showed me, right?
uh-huh.
Okay. And that was a quantitative?
It was a mixture. Remember what
A
it had
mixed.
like three. It was
Yeah.
the pre, and then the during, and then the after.
Right, but as far as the procedure, did they interview teachers?
They had interviews, they had observations, they had transcripts, they had this one which was more
Uh-huh.
of a survey.
Okay, so yeah, generally speaking, we have like two. I see like two options. Okay, one option would be to do a survey. And a survey is basically a questionnaire where you send out. In our case, you need to apply at least to 120 teachers.
Mm-hmm.
It would be more of a quantitative research in that. I mean, you would have some questions that were closed, and you might have some open questions as well.
Uh-huh.
Um, then that you would or could interpret. Um, but I'm just thinking, or the other side would, and there would basically be no interviews. I mean, that's like a more of a just a survey where you're sending out tons, and it wouldn't, you really aren't interviewing. It's more of and the idea would be that you would be doing an analysis, a quantitative analysis, where you would be generalizing this sample of 120 teachers to all the teachers in Aguascalientes. It would be a statistical analysis. Or you scale back we would have to talk about the purpose of doing a survey, but you could take the same information you took from that survey, from that study, and do more of just a qualitative research, choosing fewer teachers, but focusing on basically the same idea, but trying to get more of an interpretive study where you're understanding how they are rationalizing what they do, which would also involve you observing some classes. But now we're talking about 2 or 3 teachers, or even maybe one doing a case study, depending.
Okay.
And so I think at this point you need to decide which direction you want to take. Now this may or may not affect that much the the literature, because right now you're focusing more on certain theoretical concepts,
Okay.
but it's something that you do need to decide on, since we're getting ready to finalize the literature review. So I mean, that's kind of how I see it as far as like two options here. And so yeah, that's something you probably need to think about, and that's going to influence to a degree your research questions.
Yeah, because I wanted to like finally have my research questions so that I can like start.
Yeah.
And so I can do the quantitative.
Well, so what research question? I mean, what are your research questions right now? What do you have?
Because remember we had the other ones like when do teachers decide to change?
Right. Right.
Like,
Okay.
And this one it would be like why do teachers reflect, and when do they do it, like before or?
Yeah, the only thing that I'm like, if you do like just a survey and you don't interview teachers, and you send out a questionnaire for 120, and you have this question about when do you reflect, or the only part of it, the problem is you're not going to observe them doing it, and so it's just basically going to be saying they said this, and you're not really going to have any evidence to support exactly how so I was leaning more towards suggesting a qualitative research where you could ask the same question. I mean, basically what we talked about before, still taking that information from that questionnaire and getting some ideas about what to ask in the interviews, maybe even what to observe, because there was a lot of good information in that one questionnaire about reflecting before, during, and after. Still focusing on reflection, still focusing on lesson plan and deviating or not deviating from the lesson plan. The same focus, but just
using
that questionnaire, maybe not exactly the way it is, but trying to get information. So I think we could talk more specifically about that later when we start talking about data collection. I still think we can focus. I mean, I don't know if you have some other research questions you want to discuss. I don't want to talk you out of doing something you don't want to do, but I want it to be, I'm just trying to think here down the road, how, the benefit of doing a qualitative research is that you can combine a lot of different types of data that you can't do in a quantitative.
Yeah.
And the good thing about the quantitative is that you can reach more people and infer and make generalizations, which also has a benefit. But I think in this case, I'm more leaning towards a qualitative research where we understand more deeply about one or two specific contexts and really understand that, and then make observations about the implications of your research.
Okay, so I can stay with like what we had and still include like the reflection.
Oh, sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That I have to change.
No. I mean, I don't see any need to, because I think the last time we talked, or at least when I was going through my mind, maybe I didn't articulate it clearly, but we talked about reflection. We hadn't talked a lot about reflection, but it's pretty much the same as evaluating or looking at this difference between the plan written syllabus versus what they actually do. So the thing you'll have to probably do is look at, again, the instrument and decide what parts of that instrument, because it's very complete, most appropriate or what you can use, right? But again, we can deal with that a little bit later, not so much in the theory. So I think the thing we need to determine here is, because if you read up on Sean and the reflective practitioner, they have two notions: one that you reflect on action and you reflect in action. So I think you can talk about those two different types of reflection in your literature review, but later you'll have to decide which of those, whether it's both or one or the other, that you want to observe. And that might be later, we might bring that into your research questions. I mean, I think we can start with our research questions, but we might modify them a little bit later as we get, as I understand, or we understand more about your literature review and you start applying your instruments.
Okay.
So I think I would just go ahead and start upload your literature review. I'm sorry, your research questions and your thesis statements first, if you would, and then go ahead and add your headings. So here, let me just pull this up here. So in this section, go ahead and add your thesis statement here. This is at the end of your introduction. Don't worry about completing your introduction right now. Just add your thesis statement. Here at the bottom, add your research questions, and then add anywhere from 2 to 4 main sections or headings. So think about how you want to divide up your literature review. Add those headings first, and then start typing. If you want feedback from me as far as the organization, go ahead and do that. Send me an email and I'll make comments directly to Google Drive if you have doubts about how you're organizing or how you should organize your work. In week 2, I uploaded that link, and so that for developing an argument, and so that's something that I'm going to be looking for here, how you're developing your argument in your literature review that evolves around your thesis statement. That's also linked to your research questions.
Okay, so I can stay with the research questions, like when do teachers decide to change?
When they decide, and why. Yeah, when and why seems to be.
When do they decide and like why?
Why they? Yeah, and the when can be kind of also like frequency. So we can leave it as when. But it could also, you're also going to be saying like when does it happen, and then also maybe how often. Yeah, so just to kind of keep that in the back of your mind, like how often that happens. So yeah, that's kind of.
And the why? Why do they?
Right. Now, do you have some ideas about how you want to organize your literature review, like some main sections that you think you might include in your theory?
Well, I wanted to include maybe like lesson plan, like what is the lesson plan, like what it contains, and then like the types of reflection that they have. And I don't know if I should include like that. I read about continuous professional development, that you reflect, that you think about it, and that helps you like. I don't know if I should include that.
Yeah, as long as yeah, I think so. It depends on exactly what you want to talk about. I think as long as you try to keep it more towards daily practice or lesson practice, or depending on. But yeah, I think that might also be possible. I'd have to look at it specifically to determine that. I'm thinking about the lesson plan and starting off by talking about the different types, and we talked about this I think the last session, which is fine, you can do that, but try to stick to the types that you are likely to see, and I don't think it would take up a big part of your literature review, so that might be one section depending on how many sections you want to have, but think about how you're going to break down the reflection piece, whether it's in action or on action, or some other classification, some other way of some of the types of reflections. Maybe it's based on reflecting on the lesson, reflecting on assessment, reflecting on language, maybe, I don't know, depends on what you find in the literature. Right, there's a lot of things they can reflect on. So the things that you want to measure for your reflection, you want to try to include in your literature review. So think about things that you are going to be looking for and measuring. And so if they say, well, I deviated from the lesson plan because I changed, because of the assessment, I wasn't planning on, doing a quiz, but I just decided at the last minute to do a quiz, for example. So that might,
Or like students' needs, like
if they detect something based on the student's needs. Now, yeah, I think, and maybe, they can reflect before the lesson, they can reflect during the lesson, and they can reflect after. So you might also break it down into when they reflect the most, and how they do it. I'm trying to look for where is it? Now, this is called the SIOP model, Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol, and this is popular in the U.S. In the UK, it's called CLIL, Content Language Integrated Learning. But this protocol here basically is a way for teachers to plan their lessons, and they plan it based on preparation or planning, instruction, and assessments. And within each of these, there are a lot of different aspects, okay, that come in, to play. So, for example, in preparation, they might plan for the content objectives and the language or the language objectives. Some of this applies very specifically to English as a second language. So it's students that live in the U.S. where they're going to math class or physics, and they're learning a content course, but they're also language learners. But I still think most of this still relates even to EFL, English as a foreign language, even though it says here, state the content objectives. You could change that and modify that. Maybe it's not a content course, but there's always something that they're talking about. So it's always about language, and then they're also communicating something else, whether it's diet or health or something else. So a lot of this information here might be useful. You can find this online. If you do have problems, you can make copies of this, but you can find this online. It's called the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol, or the SIOP model. If you do a search, SIOP model, the SIOP model, and I think you can get kind of an idea or some ideas. They talk about, for example, in instruction, about vocabulary, links to prior learning. How did the teacher link to prior learning, things like that. Now, a lot of it's going to depend on their own syllabus, but you also might be able to talk about in the theory certain aspects that are mentioned here in the SIOP model that also relate to the lesson plan that that you will be working with, and one that you will include in your literature review. So you could, for example, talk about the lesson plan that you are familiar with, that you think that you will be working with, and then read up on this and see and compare and contrast this. This would be part of your theory, because this is based on research, years and years of research, in fact. And you could talk about how this relates, to what you're looking at. Also, CLIL. This is Content and Language Integrated Learning. A lot of information as well online, I think you can find, but they talk, and it's very similar to the SIOP model, but there's other key concepts here that might fall in line with what you're looking at and what you're going to be observing in your own research. They talk about here CLIL being driven by cognition over community, content, and communication. So I can
talk about like Bloom's taxonomy, like for the objectives, or?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it depends on, yeah, if it depends on how they articulate the objectives. If they use behavioral objectives, and this could be other part of your theory, behavioral objectives or expressive objectives. These are two types of objectives, and we're usually more used to behavioral objectives, where based on Bloom's taxonomy, we state specific verbs that performance verbs that we expect our students to do. So that might be, one aspect of your theory, differentiating between expressive objectives and behavioral objectives, and that's kind of related to a lot of, they may say, well, today my students didn't analyze something, they synthesized, or they didn't, I wanted them to create something, but they only were able to recognize. It all depends on what performance verbs that they use, but that would also be a basis for reflection and discussion about whether they achieved the daily goals or the weekly goals or not. Okay. And that would be kind of a underlining question that you would have with your participants is, did your students achieve the results, right? Because your lesson plan, it's there to achieve certain results, and so that would be kind of the underlying question that you have on an ongoing basis with your participants. So try to think about all those ways that teachers might, answer that question, and kind of working backwards, find some of the theory that might relate to that, and objectives is certainly one of those as well.
Okay.
So.
For the thesis statement, it's like last semester we have to state the problem and then.
Yeah, pretty much the same. The introduction, 250 to 350 words. I would start off with a hook, and then provide some sort of context around a problem that links to your thesis. So everything really builds up to the thesis in your introduction. So I would come up with some sort of background. I think Marister also mentioned some other things to include in your introduction, but essentially it's providing context and background with regard to the problem that you want to discuss. Okay.
But that's in the introduction, and we don't have to do it.
Yeah, right now don't worry too much about the introduction,
okay.
But everything else here, you'll have your main sections, and the last paragraph will be kind of a conclusion, in the sense that you are going to transition. What I would do in the last paragraph of your literature review would be to restate your thesis statement, then introduce your research questions, and then finish with a kind of a closing statement.
Okay.
So that's how I would do the last paragraph of your literature review. So what else? Does how do you feel about? Does you feel like you?
Yeah, I couldn't I couldn't start because I couldn't.
Anytime you're not sure or have doubts, just come by or ask me. Again, don't get stuck.
I came in on Monday, and I thought I had to but no.
Okay.
Now that with this talk, today I'm gonna start.
Okay. All right. No.
Yes.
Yeah. Hopefully, if you're pretty clear on the main topics, and you've
and
read quite a bit, and you have the information. It's just a matter of writing it out. But don't spend days lost. If you're not sure about something, we can talk about it again, and try to work things out. But I think you've got a lot here. In fact, I know the chore here is going to be narrowing it down, and that's why if you upload something today and you want me to look at the organization, just provide this information that I mentioned, and before you get started, if you're not sure, then I'll give you feedback directly in Google Drive.
Okay. It's 2,500 words? Or?
Approximately 2,250, more or less. If you figure 250 for the introduction, we're asking 2,500 words for the lit review. So.
You had a book about the author is Sean, I believe.
Yeah.
Can I borrow your book, please?
Were you able to find any information in eBay?
I found a lot of information, but sometimes it's not complete. It's only like chapter 1, and they give you like.
But let's take a look. Because eBay should have the entire book. All the books should be. Now, some of your information that you find about reflective learning or reflective practitioner may or may not relate directly to the teaching fields, but you can still, a lot of it is still practical and things that you can use. For example, here, reflective practice in nursing. Now, it's about nursing, but I would bet that you can find a lot of information in that book that is also more recent. This is 2013. This is 1983 or something. So I would recommend, and look at this, reflective practice for the healthcare professionals. This is a 3rd edition. Developing teaching skills, and I bet in here they talk about reflective practitioners. So even though Sean was he kind of brought about this term, I think there's more recent literature that I think will help you more. And there's just all of this, I think, teaching and learning, pedagogy curriculum. I bet there's something about reflective learning or reflective practice. So, and let me see, Sean. Like here, I bet you can probably use something here. Reflecting on reflective practice. Let's see here. Yeah, but you don't have access, do you? So here you're going to have some information. Now you may not have all of it, but I bet you can find some here also. For then. And yeah, there's just a lot of information. Reflective practice eyesights. Okay, this is good. These two authors, Sean and Argyris, they wrote this book here, Theory and Practice, and this is another possible book. This article talks about this, so you might find some helpful information in this article. Reflective Practice and Overview. And overviews are sometimes helpful to kind of direct you. So I think here's another. Okay, may or may not have access to this, so you might. This is Creative Commons, so I bet you have access to this. How to think reflectively. Sean's model. So I would try to use this as much, these articles and books that are a little bit more recent, that even base on this book, just because it's more recent and maybe they have a different perspective and different take on it. So try it. If you're if you can't find something specific, let me know. And okay, so yeah, so you can start writing basically, about one week or so. But just send me an email if you want me to look at anything throughout the process, and if you want to discuss something before next tutoring session, come by. We can certainly do that. All right. Okay, excellent.
Thank you, teacher.
Okay, Luz, have a good week. Bye.